iPhone 13. It's that time of year again. This is the time where I'm completely overwhelmed with creating as much content as I possibly can, and in all that, I end up making a little bit less. So I'm glad to get this episode out. It's a little delayed. I've got Michael Tobin on to talk about some of the new features on the 13. Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Hey, doing great. Thanks for having me. Always excited to talk iPhone stuff. And like you said, it's Techtober, the craziest time of year.
Yeah, and I don't even cover all the other brands. Like, everybody's making their announcements right now. I mean, even Amazon just had an event announcing hardware products. I'm like, I'm not even paying attention to any of that stuff. And I'm overwhelmed just focusing on Apple right now. So I can't imagine what tech YouTubers that actually cover all of this are experiencing right now. But we both got some videos out. We got, I did my usual photographer's review of the iPhone 13, and then I split it up and also did a filmmakers review because it just felt like there was a lot of new video focused stuff, especially the flagship feature of cinematic mode, which it's not so much that it's flagship and like it's going to change everything, but it looks really cool. And I think to normal people, it's going to catch their eye maybe more than like what everybody else did with it. The first video you got out was kind of similar filmmaking perspective. Like, how was that shooting the filmmaking review for you?
That was good. I mean, I agree with what I think you said in one of your videos that in so many past Apple events, it's like they kind of, quickly talk about it, especially still photography has been a major focus the past couple of years. And so I was super stoked that this year they finally really focused on video. And like you said, cinematic mode may not be the, blow up the industry necessarily right off the bat, but it is a huge feature release. And so as soon as I, finished watching the event, I, like many other creators, just passionately wanted to create as much content around that as possible. So it wasn't even, I was happy that I wasn't like, didn't have to scratch my head this year. Like, okay, what am I going to talk about? Everyone's going to talk about, the same two talking points or something. And we actually all had something to experiment with and look forward to with new features.
Yeah, actually,
So
that
really
is
fun.
a lot of the reason that I did the filmmaking one first is because I'm like, well, nobody has seen cinematic mode yet. We've only seen a few of Apple's examples. So all I have to do is shoot something cinematic and that's interesting, right? At this moment, that's interesting. In a few months, everybody will have seen cinematic mode a lot and we know what it looks like. We know the good and the bad of it. But on the day of release, I and everyone else is just hungry to be like, what does this look like? So my goal was just to get out there and shoot a cinematic sequence and then talk a bit about it. But
because also like what you said in your video is that when we watch Apple's demo reel, obviously every DP and like every person who worked on that, their sole purpose was to make it look as good as possible. It's an Apple promo. And so when we all got our hands on it, it's like, okay, let's make something that looks good, but also real world use.
Yeah, totally. Because it's hard to really judge it from what they're doing. I mean, having looked at their example next to ours, it's not the same. There were almost no moments in Apple's demonstration where I could see any issues, and in mine, it's pretty clear. And I think that's a few things. Like, it's definitely lighting was a big thing for them, that they sort of structured things in a way that the backgrounds wouldn't interfere with the hair as much, and like it was set up in a way to look as perfect as possible. Sure. And then for me, just being in a wild environment where I wasn't even directing people, like my video, people are just like on the beach wandering around and stuff. And in all those examples, well, first of all, I can't tell them where they're going to be, and I can't tell them, okay, now look away, now look back to me, and try to control that. So that kind of messiness, I think, is going to be most people's reality, but it definitely did lead to more overall conflicts. And then just to wrap up the creating these videos idea, it's like then the other right after that, as soon as I finished this, tried to get started on the photographer's review, which is like my biggest video every year. Basically, it's like pretty reliable that it usually is what gets the most views. And I mean, I was pretty happy with what we were able to do with it, because we were able to get some really great photography for it. Like the samples ended up being pretty awesome.
They look great.
And And yeah, and I was able to shoot. Thanks. I was really able to shoot like a lot. Like there's a really high volume before the video came out, and at the same time, Marco was editing at the like while I was shooting, so we were able to kind of keep moving forward a little more quickly than, or it ended up not being more quickly. It just ended up having more density in the same amount of time compared to usual, because there was a lot of photography that we did for it, and yeah, I'd just say like overall, like it's hard to keep these videos feeling new. Like we have had so many years of iPhone releases, and probably all the biggest innovations in the camera are behind us, right? Like I really liked, I haven't watched that many other people's videos yet, but the beginning of Marquez's, he was saying, making the analogy of like, oh, there's a new camera he released every year, this new car released, whether you need it or not. And I'm like, that's how a lot of people should be thinking about this. Cause I'm so tired of the comments of like, it's only been 1 year and the changes aren't big enough, or do we really need a new phone every year? And it's like, calm down, everybody. Like, of course they're going to make a new one. It's only up to us, like as like journalists or whatever we really are, to find the story and it's not up to Apple to like keep us entertained. It's more about like what is there that is interesting in these new phones, because I think there's actually a lot. I wasn't the only one to say this, but a lot of people have had the take that this was kind of a bigger upgrade than the 11 to the 12, even though I don't think we fully acknowledge that.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people too who may not necessarily understand all the super nerdy stuff only see the physical changes. And so they saw a bigger physical change from the 11 to the 12 again. And so when they don't see too much of a physical change this year, they're like, oh, well, it's not that different. And yelling percentages of bigger sensors or f-stops and stuff to people who don't understand that stuff aren't going to realize like, oh, from 2.4 to 1.8 or whatever doesn't sound like much, so it really can't be that big of a deal. And it's not until they kind of like in your last podcast talking to the Apple engineers, it's not until you actually use it that you're like, holy crap, this is like really good. This is a really good camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, remind me to get back to that last podcast because I want to talk about it for a second. But
Sure.
But first, I'd love for you to introduce yourself a bit, because like if anybody hasn't seen your channel already, what is it that you do? Like I've seen your videos about filmmaking. You've covered a bunch of the same gear that I use, so that's how I stumbled across it. And then recently, we're just testing ProRes on the iPhone 13. But other than YouTube, how did you get into filmmaking, and what do you do other than YouTube?
Yeah, so I actually always wanted to be a filmmaker. Obviously, when I was a kid, YouTube, being a YouTuber, content creator wasn't really a thing. So I never really knew how I was going to do that, especially in the Midwest. Don't exactly have Hollywood out here. But as the years went on, I always had a passion for technology. And actually, right after high school, I ended up working for Apple for 4 or 5 years in the retail space
Cool.
only. But that was a blast. And so my love for especially Apple and just technology in general, as well as filmmaking, continued to kind of grow in parallel. And around 2016, just started uploading YouTube, worked a couple marketing jobs and stuff. But the past I guess 3 years now, I've been doing pretty much content creation, and then I do some commercial filmmaking on the side. Kind of taking a break in the past year once COVID hit and stuff. Kind of just focused on building up the channel and kind of really started being more consistent and more kind of full-time thinking about it last year, and was able to get, it took like 4 or 5 years to get to like 10K subscribers. And then in the past year, I've gone from 10 to now like 44 or something, like 40, 43, somewhere around there.
Yeah, which is awesome. I mean, I'd almost, I guess, take a quick tangent to talk about being in that stage of YouTube, because like I remember being there too. And it's funny because like I remember things like when I was around your size I went on Sarah Dietschy's podcast. And it was funny because like she sort of mentioned during it that it was like, I'm like a smaller YouTuber. And it's funny because I was thinking about it like at the time, like, but I just grew by tens of thousands. Like this is I'm doing great. I have more followers than anybody I know in real life. And it's so funny, that scale of like what people consider small, that like, yeah, when you get to 3,000 or 5,000, it feels like, wow, like I am I made it, like I'm a YouTuber. I've got people following me. This is crazy. So then, yeah, to get
Well,
to like 50,000 is like a serious accomplishment. And it's just like, I don't think we appreciate that scale all the time.
it's true. And I mean, I always try to, anytime I like feel small or like feel that that's an insignificant number that I'm at, I always think about like if those people were in a room, it would feel very overwhelming to have,
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
1,000 people in a room. And yeah, so it's cool. And I mean, people very underestimate what you can be a full-time content creator with 5,000 subscribers just as much as someone who has a million. Not to,
Yeah, no,
have a
100%.
long speech about audience size, but yeah.
No, it's true. And there's other things about that, like there's become much less of a connection between subscriber numbers and views. And I was able to see that with like, so even on the channel for this podcast, which is separate from my main channel, I've had videos that did better than, videos I released at the same time on the main channel. And that is weird, right? Like it's like, I got like
Yep.
40,000 on the main channel and then like a video kind of 40,000 on the small channel views. And then a video bombed that same week on the main channel. And it's like, okay. And that's just to show that like the algorithm isn't all about subscribers anymore. It's so much more focused on viewer signals. So I don't know if anybody's out there thinking like, oh, it's saturated. I can't be a YouTuber now. It's too late. Like, oh, it is not even close. Like YouTube will push up good content. So
Good content always wins. And it's
yeah,
the hardest
and
truth
so
because it's easy to
you're proof
poke
of
and
it,
blame
so.
everything else.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, yeah. So we got our videos out.
Yep.
Where to start with it? I don't know. I mean, I feel like maybe we should split out, starting with just talking about the regular iPhone a little bit, because like I said, I told you I was going to come back around to the last episode first. That's what I should be talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last episode was a pretty cool opportunity, right? I mean, I think I said this in the intro, but like, if there was anybody you wanted to talk to about camera design in the whole world, it's the designers of the most influential modern camera, right? Like the iPhone is what is defining the way images look. So like that was a really cool opportunity. And I just say, listening back to it, I'm like, I still wish that I had been able to hit more like actual real questions. And so I don't know. I mean, I hope there'd be some sort of similar opportunity again in the future, because like there's so much to talk about, but obviously the designers have like specific ideas of what they are excited about and what they worked on. So yeah, it was just this balance of like, okay, well, I know you came on because you wanted to talk about the thing that you just announced to the world, but I really want to get some kind of, well, I mean, I'd love to get exclusive info that nobody's ever talked about until they came on the podcast, but the odds of that happening are low. But yeah, still, I mean, it was just really cool having that like direct ability to actually have a conversation with them and just hear it straight from the people working on it directly, because that's almost the question I wanted to ask the most, is like, how does it actually feel to you to be influencing photography so much?
Yeah. And that's, like you said, it's really cool to hear, because a lot of times when we see a feature and we may wonder like why, and I know I think after you hopped off the call with them and you were kind of just speaking during your kind of outro bit, I believe you were talking about a couple of things that you thought were mistakes, like the flare issue. Like, I don't think anyone can really pass as like a feature. Like, that's just purely like some bad optics that I know they're trying to work out and stuff. I'm curious, was there anything that they talked about that really either like not necessarily blew your mind, but gave you like really cool insight into how the mechanics work, or just the reasoning why they chose certain things?
There were things like that I hadn't thought about previously, like the reasons for moving the stabilization to the sensor being connected to the weight of the lens, I think is really like an interesting idea and something you don't think about. If you look at iFixit's teardowns and you see the actual camera mechanisms being pulled out of the iPhone 12 and being pulled out of the 13, the size difference really jumps out at you. Like each lens is much taller because they hide, like in the design of a modern iPhone, they hide the height by leveling them all out. So all three lenses look about the same size, but the true internals, each one is a very different size depending on the lens, and the telephoto is much taller, and you can see the size difference inside, and you can see that there is a bigger total not like square area, volume for the whole unit inside. It's also just taking up more space inside the whole iPhone case, because of the larger sensors, which I believe all of them are larger, maybe not the telephoto. Somebody tried to correct me on this on the video. Actually, they're saying the ultra wide is not a new sensor, and I double checked, and it is actually a new sensor on the Pro.
Yeah.
So they are larger physical sensors as well, and you can you can see that like there's this like jump in size. And I want to know if this is the kind of question I'd like to ask them actually, is like, is there a point, can you foresee the point now where the physical size of the camera will sort of plateau, and it's like, okay, we can't get any bigger than this, so now all the improvements need to come with either improved sensors, improved lenses, or improved software, because we can't get any bigger with the size. And I bet we haven't hit it yet. Like, I don't mind how much bigger the camera's got. So I don't know. Like, what about you? Did you notice the thickness?
Not when I saw the keynote and stuff. It wasn't until I literally was at the Apple store and was holding my 12 Pro Max next to the new 13 Pro Max that I was like, oh, wow. Like, it's the same design. And so I understand why people say like it looks the exact same. But in person, you can clearly see the size difference, to me at least. But I am curious on that topic. Would you rather hit that limit and keep the size roughly the same, or maybe a little bit bigger if they can improve, but then mostly improve through like computational photography type stuff like the cinematic mode? Or would you be into some sort of solution, almost like what was it Motorola tried years ago with like the whole attachments on the back? Because like I would love one day to have like a Super 35 sensor, or at least like a Micro Four Thirds sensor on a phone. That would be ridiculous, but that would look really cool.
I think me and probably everybody listening to this are not the average opinion, and we'd all take like, I just want I want to look like a Leica. Like, I just want a big fat, I just want it to be a camera that I can make phone calls on. Not actually. I mean, there is a limit. Definitely haven't hit it yet. I mean, I feel like you could throw another millimeter on there and I'd still totally be happy with it. Like, but I don't know. There's those rumors, the iPhone 14, who knows how accurate they'll end up being a year from now, but they are adding, if you haven't seen the images, like the idea is that they're going to add thickness to the whole phone everywhere. And that'll kind of bury the camera sensors inside of the rest of the casing, right? So that you'll perceive the phone as being flat. They've still got all the size of those lenses, but the whole phone is significantly thicker. And I mean, yeah, if I look at how much thicker that would have to be, it's a lot. I think that'd be worth it though. Like, that makes me think of like what Red was doing with their, hydrogen phone that went nowhere. It was big and chunky, but it's for professionals. I'm like, that could be an iPhone Pro to me, for the Pro anyway. I mean, the Mini probably shouldn't do this, but yeah, I could take a big chunky Pro. I'd be happy with that. Yeah.
And that means bigger battery. And like you said in your videos, we need bigger batteries.
Yeah. Keep them coming. This episode is brought to you by Flipboard, a great resource for learning more about your next iPhone, or photography, or filmmaking, or whatever it is you want to learn about. But those are the things that I like to use it for. Flipboard is a very simple to use tool that gives you basically a magazine-like experience for all of the different content you might want to enjoy on the internet. So, for example, I follow a few different topics on there, like just technology in general, Apple, of course, photography and cinematography, and I get targeted information that has a beautifully displayed layout so that there's big images and big headlines. It's easy and fun to browse through, and I can discover new things in a way that I really can't find on many other websites. So it's suggesting material to me based on what their editors curate, but I can also follow people individually. So for example, you could follow me. I'm Stallman on Flipboard. Go to flipboard.com/Stallman, and you'll see the things that I've been flipping to different boards that I like. So these are just articles that I found useful for all sorts of different topics, and I think that you could probably find useful too. It's got a really easy to use interface too. This is part of the fun of it, is like, as you're going through it, you just have this flipping experience with your thumb that is just like, really easy and comfortable to move through. And then when you click into articles, you get this great reading experience and viewing experience. It's just a great way to interact with any kind of content that you're looking for. So head over to flipboard.com/Stallman. Like I said, you should be following in there because I'm posting great stuff all the time. And they do have a bunch of new photography sections with brand new kinds of content. I'm going to talk about that a bit on YouTube. So keep an eye on it in future videos. But until then, thanks again, Flipboard, for supporting the show. Well, so it's a good place to get into specifics about the regular 13 and the mini, because I actually have a lot less to say about these. Like they're a little closer to the incremental upgrade that I think we often talk about, or a lot of the the mainstream reviews. Like the New York Times had the most incremental upgrade yet, or something was the headline. Like, okay, depends what you're looking at, but they were closer to that. The regular 13s. Are less exciting, but the increments are meaningful as well. I think maybe the biggest one is that now the 13 mini is so much more of a practical choice for a lot of people because of that additional battery life, and because it has the same wide camera as everything else. So you've got the camera that was in the Pro Max last year and the battery life of the Pro last year, or of the 12 last year, which is amazing, right? Like that's fixing a lot of, if you had problems with the mini, it probably was that, okay, it doesn't have the best possible camera and it doesn't have great battery life, and those are massively improved. And so to me now, the most interesting choice to me now is between the mini and then kind of skipping the regular 13 and going straight to the Pro, and then if screen size is important, the Pro Max. But whereas with the 12, I think last year there was really a sweet spot with that regular 12. Like, you'd save some money. You weren't getting that many huge feature jumps when you went to the 12 Pro. You're getting a telephoto lens, but the ultra wide was the same. So, and a bunch of other features that we'll get into that you weren't gaining by going to the Pro. Now, the Pro jump from the 13 to 13 Pro is significant. Like there's a lot there. So all of a sudden, it's, to me, the interesting choices to people that are in this audience are like the mini, if you're into that size, which I love. I actually really enjoy using the mini. The battery life killed it for me, and that was a lot of it, honestly. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, if that's the form factor for you, then you can feel better about it. And if you need the performance, you just go straight for the regular Pro.
Yeah, it's true. And I know you also talked about it in your when you were talking to the engineers, and it's what I'm a super fan of, which is kind of leveling the playing field to where you don't have to like feature nitpick to buy the right phone for you. So putting the better camera, or at least the camera that is in most of the other phones. And then now it's just like, oh, what size do I want? Or, a couple other features that are easy. It always goes back to, I used to always talk about this when I worked at Apple in the stores, is I remember Steve Jobs. Hey, this is the anniversary of his death. Oh, rest in peace.
That's right.
I remember him coming back from Apple in the 90s and eliminating most of the products, and he drew that 4 quadrants where it was like consumer and professional, and basically you get a laptop and then professionals get a laptop and then consumer, desktop, consumer, and obviously we added phones and tablets. But I've always liked that mentality of like a consumer kind of majority of people version and then a professional version, and not to have too many kind of sub categories in that, or else it just gets too confusing and too chaotic, and you start to get these very confusing upgrades. And so I very much like having a really good consumer device, the mini and the regular, the mini and the smaller Pro, and then have like the crazy Pro Max or even the regular Pro now, and then again just choose the size you like.
Yeah, it also feels like a very Steve Jobsy, or just an Apple thing to have it be that, like, I think right now we're finally at a place where there isn't a bad iPhone you can choose. The only reason we really were at that before is can I remind myself, what is the base model? I think they moved it up to 128, and I just want to be sure of that before I go on.
Yes, I believe so.
That I'm not misremembering. When it was, the base model could be 64 gigs, that was too small for a lot of years. So you sort of could buy the wrong iPhone. Now you kind of can't. Like, they're all great, right? So whether you go with the Mini all the way up to the Pro Max, like everything is awesome, and that's that is what you want to feel when you go into what is effectively like not quite but almost luxury store. Like it's a
Yeah,
premium experience buying from Apple, and you don't want to feel like you could walk away with a lemon, and you really can't this year. So I
it's
think that's
true.
pretty great. You went with the Pro Max though. Is that right?
Yeah. I always have like, yeah, whatever is the best battery life and the best camera. Like, I mean, obviously for what I do, the camera is the most important thing. Even if I'm not shooting for YouTube, just like in my personal life, I'm just kind of a little OCD about always capturing the highest quality I can,
That's
which
fair.
is where I ran into issues with ProRes already. But we'll talk about that later, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, we'll get to the ProRes towards the end because that's something that was like your exclusive that nobody else had really seen yet. So, but let's hit on the main camera a little bit more because that's still common to all of them. Is that
Yeah.
upgrade that at first I had thought was basically just adding the sensor from last year, because last year they said 47% more light in the Pro 12 Pro Max, and then this year they said the same thing about that same lens in all of them. So I was like, okay, it's the
Yep.
same. Turns out it is a little bit different. And uh, I I know saw a couple samples where I was like, okay, it's a little bit better, but similar. So the fact that you're now getting the best possible camera from last year in every single one, and it is visibly better as well. Like there aren't again, this is getting to the point where in the daylight, there's not a lot of examples where you see it. I do find you can see it in bokeh though, like that larger sensor does
Hmm.
blur out more if you're kind of close to a subject. And then in lower light, I mean, it was really there. And the best example, actually, I screwed up the labels in my filmmaking video, which is always my biggest fear. It's what I'm the most worried
Yeah.
about. And I triple checked them in the photography video. I don't think I made those mistakes, but in the filmmaking one, I had a low light example of the 12 and the 13 side by side. And what you could really see that really jumped out wasn't so much about the noise, it was that the HDR continued working as the light went further and further down. So the highlights were still preserved.
Yeah.
And this was in a video, when it was like completely dark, right? Like, so there was like light shining on the side of the building. Again, so people were commenting like, well, why does the 12 look better than 13? Well, it's my mistake because I mixed up the labels now. But like you really you can see it, like it's 100% there. And the 13 looks like that HDR that you expect out of a modern iPhone. Whereas the 12, it's like, oh, okay, we've pushed it a little past the limits, and it's falling apart a bit here. So
See, and I didn't even really think of this as a feature until I was listening to your last podcast episode, where because I agree that when I was first taking photos on the 13 Pro Max, it was like, okay, like it's not groundbreakingly different, but I can see some improvements. But then when I heard the engineers talk about how they can capture the same amount of detail and the same amount of light in less time, I was like,
mhm.
okay, actually, that is a benefit. So even if the final result doesn't look drastically different, the newer phone captured the same result in less time. So less time you have to stand there and have a steady hand, or a lot of times when I'm doing night stuff, or I mean, I have two little kids, so I don't really have 3 seconds to make someone sit still and take a photo or something. So the shorter duration is actually a huge benefit now that I think about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was something I was seeing in the tests in my photography video, was that night mode, for example, would expose less time and would also switch over to night mode um, less often. So you wouldn't need a long exposure to shoot in low light. You would just stay in deep fusion and end up with like an overall sharper image without switching to that long exposure. And a funny thing I noticed in that testing period as well, and it's not what I'm saying out loud. If you watch the video, you have to look at what I wrote on screen, because I only realized this after sitting at the computer and looking through the metadata, that like when he was saying that it was like 1 or 3 second exposures, what it reports back in the metadata was like a fifth of a second. And I think what's happening is that because the way night mode has always seemed to work, this isn't new, but is that it'll capture the fastest image it can right away of the brightest part. Hopefully that's usually the person, and then it draws out a longer exposure of every darker part of the scene and like lifts all the shadows. And you can always see it while it's developing, especially if you have something with a big difference, like the example I first saw it on with the, I think it was with the 11. There was a house on a lake at night, right? So stars over top, like pitch black around this house, but the lights are on in the house. And you could see this, like it would instantly, catch the house, and the house is sharp. And then you just watch the next 30 seconds as the stars start to get brighter and brighter and brighter as the exposure gets longer. And so I think it's reporting on that fast exposure, that initial like capture of the sharpness, and then it's adding detail in as it stays open longer. So anyway, the point of all that is to say that you'll end up seeing different exposure numbers when you first start to capture your night mode. And then you'll also have a faster shutter speed, like you were just saying, which is a big advantage. There's also other things like they're able to raise the ISO higher and have the same amount of noise. So again, if you just like look at the what's happening in the metadata there, like that's often what it is that they're bumping the ISO, but you don't see a quality difference because it can handle more. And yeah, it's pretty cool. Do you end up doing like much more photo or video with your phone typically?
So I would say more video, but I've been trying to get back into photography. That's where my roots are in. I did still photography for probably 5 or 6 years before I ever started really getting into video. And, especially years ago, mobile photography wasn't very good, but now I'm definitely trying to get into it. I will say, like I said before, I always get ruined by the best quality stuff. And a while back ago, a rental house lent me a Hasselblad for a couple weeks. And so now when I take still photographs on like anything, I'm just like, oh, that would have looked really good on medium format. But I will say that the still photography that you get on this looks very good. And I was happy when I watched your still photography video or your photographer's review, how you pointed out the contrast in the lower lights is better, because I like low light stuff. And I was happy to see that it didn't all look like washed out HDRE, kind of just flat images. They really added back in the contrast. But I am curious if I can get more thoughts on, you talked about in, I believe it was the photographer one, maybe it was the video one, about how the balance of this stock camera app having too many or too little like features and buttons for like pro control. Do you wish for like a pro mode? Because I know a lot of Android phones, when I've done tests on Samsung devices, they have pro mode. Sony Xperia has the best pro mode for video in their stock camera app. Do you like having only third party like Halide or Filmic for video, or do you wish that the stock camera app had more features or buttons? I know you mentioned white balance, but
Yeah. I mean, I am primarily a user of the stock camera app. I like Halide for being able to override stuff, especially like white balance. But it just has a bunch of sort of like those polished features that help you like really perfect a shot. But I don't need to do that too often, so I'm not shooting in Halide super often. And then Filmic, which it's awesome that they worked with you on this. I've worked with them before. They do a lot of amazing stuff. They're a great company. The interface of Filmic Pro is such a mess. I don't enjoy shooting with it. They've got all of the features I want. Like I want all those manual controls, but I find it so confusing to actually use that I don't know. It's hard. It's hard for me to actually open it very often. I'm staring at it a lot of the time. Like I know the change I want to make. I don't know what to do with the interface. I don't know where to touch.
Yeah, I totally get that. And what's funny is I am actually with you on that. I mostly use the stock camera app, especially because of just the shortcuts, whether it's on the lock screen or swipe down from the control center or whatever. It's just faster access than a lot of the third-party apps and faster load times. And for the majority of things I'm shooting, it's great. I would like a little bit more pro features in the stock camera app, or at least like pro mode to control like shutter, because the exposure knob, I don't know, sometimes just doesn't get perfect. But yeah, with Filmic's interface, I just watched Patrick Tomaso's video on that, and he was ripping it apart too.
Yeah.
And it's fine. Most of Filmic's app I'm fine with, just because I've used it enough now. In the beginning, it was very frustrating, but I've used it so much in the past year or two doing these videos that it's kind of second nature. The one thing that I do think is terrible, and I've given them feedback on it, is just the ISO and the shutter speed wheel. That's where it kind of falls apart. But everything else is just like any new software. You just, once you get used to it, you get used to it. But
Right.
it, yeah, subjective.
Well, yeah, and then coming back to the stock camera app, to Apple's camera app, I mean, I think they've generally done a better job than most other apps. Like, it stays pretty easy to use for most people. It's getting deeper and more complicated, but yeah, do I want a
That's one
pro
thing I was
mode
going to say.
button? I don't know.
Since now that cinematic mode is here, this was the first year that as I was swiping over to cinematic mode, and then I was up in the Seattle Space Needle because we were visiting. I was like, oh, I want to do a panorama. And so I had to swipe to panorama mode. And I just swipe so much because now there's so many like modes. So I was like, I wonder when they're going to finally add like a drop down menu or something like the other. Because I do agree that there are a lot of Android phones that have way too gimmicky modes to shoot in.
Mm-hmm.
But there is quite a lot to swipe through between slow motion, cinematic, regular photo, video, and then panorama and whatever else there is.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of the Android phones, I don't want to end up there because I think they do so much worse of a job. Like, I want to not get near it. But that is part of it. Like you're saying, a lot of the extra features are total gimmicks and are not going to get used. And at least with Apple, still most of them are mostly things we use sometimes, right? There's not that many features in there that I never touch. Probably the only ones are in portrait mode, the different lighting options. Never open. I never use any of those.
That's true.
But that might be just about it. Like, everything else is still pretty useful. What I could really use though is a better way of setting the exposure while I'm in the app, because the best example is that as you touch different parts of the image, even if they look like the exposure is the same, you'll end up getting something completely different. And even worse, if you have, let's say you want to retain the sky, you want to keep it exposed correctly, and you've got a subject that is close to the front of the camera. If I just lower the exposure, it will sometimes make the subject darker, but the skies still clip. So I could just touch the skies. Now the skies fully recover, HDR can figure it out. All of the exposure looks correct, but it also sets the focus on the sky, and my subject is not in focus, even though their exposure can look good. So that's often the best way to set my exposure, is just touching the sky, but it throws the focus off. So I don't have a way of splitting that. And so that's a reason to go to other apps like Halide. I would love that to get results somehow, but
yeah, that's where almost the interface that I used to hate on Filmic Pros, if they could bring it to, because they have an exposure circle and then a focus square.
Yeah. So the thing is that, but in Apple's, because there's obviously like 3 or 4 different things going on with exposure. It's not linear like on a regular camera where you just go up and down because of the way Smart HDR is interacting. Like, there's crazy different ways of interpreting every single scene where, you can boost the shadows this much and you can bring the highlights down this much. And there's always like 5 different interpretations available within the iPhone, depending what area you touch on. And they would all be like the same exposure, but they're blending in different parts of the image differently. And right now it's a bit of a black box, not being able to access those types of HDR interpretation, but Apple's still doing the best job of it. So I don't know. 100%. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I want more options, but I also want it to be simplified. So this episode is brought to you by privacy.com. We've all been there when you're going through your bank statements or credit card statements at the end of the month, and you're trying to figure out what little payments were that you don't quite remember. And there's that little bit of stress where you're like, was this me? Did I do this? Like, what's actually going on here? And then you have to go to the effort of tracking it down. Privacy.com can help with that. It's a tool that makes it easier to manage your financial lives online while keeping your most important information secure. By generating virtual numbers, Privacy masks your bank information, so you never have to worry about giving it out to people you don't know online. Think about other personal information like your phone number. Whenever I fill out a form and have to put my phone number in there, I'm like, okay, what list am I going to end up on and how many prank calls am I going to get? Same thing with your banking information. You don't know who is going to end up accessing that in the end. So that's a good reason to be using a service like Privacy. So take back control of your payments, decide who can charge your card, how much and how often, and you can close cards at any time. Plus, you can make sure that you never accidentally get billed twice or you upgrade to another service without your consent. And Privacy is partnered with the good folks at 1Password, so you can create, use, and save privacy cards directly within your 1Password dashboard. All virtual cards created in 1Password have the same security benefits as your other privacy cards, and you can set spend limits, create single use or merchant locked cards whenever you want. So head to privacy.com/Stallman and sign up for an account. New customers will automatically get $5 to spend on your first purchase. Again, head over to privacy.com/Stallman and sign up now. And thanks again to Privacy for their support of the show. But okay, so another thing that would be worth hitting, another new feature is photographic styles. I thought this was really, I totally understand why they added this feature. After using it, there aren't a lot of implementations in it that I find are going to be really useful to me. I like that in rich contrast, it seems to want to like bring down the sky a bit. Like it darkens parts of the image in a way that I find kind of pleasing and maybe we'll end up using a little. But overall, I wasn't looking at and again, if anybody missed the explanation of it, the way to think about photographic styles is it's like if you shoot in RAW and you use Lightroom, Lightroom has to interpret all of that raw data. There's a default interpretation that you could use, but you can always change it and you can warm up the image or you can add vibrance or whatever you want. And when you export it, it gets baked into the JPEG and that's the final thing. With an iPhone, there is like a raw stage that is kind of invisible to us at the beginning. It is adding the adjustments in that pipeline while the image is still raw and uninterpreted. So that's a good idea. I just found their execution of it to be, it's sort of like, I think it's trying to get closer towards what, Android, other people have said this, I'm obviously not the first one, but it's getting closer to what Android and Pixel are doing so that Google, so that if you are more into that style of this slightly like oversaturated and very contrasty look, like you can just have that all the time. It's just going to be baked into all of your images. And then there's no reason to say that Android phones are more contrasty or whatever, because that is not a subjective interpretation. That is a creative choice that's being made.
Yeah.
So anyway, I get why they did it. I probably am not going to use it a lot. I might kind of stick with something, where there's like a 10 or 20% of that rich contrast added to it. And that's probably all I'm going to do. Did you try it out?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I treated it very similar to, like we were just talking a couple minutes ago about the different lighting styles. And when the update first came out, played with it, went through them, and I was like, to be honest, I kind of like just the natural thing, the natural look that the iPhone has. That's anytime I've looked at Android phones, I've always hated how oversaturated or contrasty or anything. Like I've always liked the balance that iPhones have standard. Like you said, I see why it's there. I can see why people, some people like it and use it. But for me, I just keep it the normal stock kind of profile and then make any changes I want in Lightroom or Darkroom. So I haven't used it to any extent, but just
and I was even saying in it that like what I'd use more often is if there's a log profile. It's like if it just make it even flatter, and maybe I'd use that so that I could grade it further later. But I'm going to tread lightly using photographic styles, even though the idea is interesting. Or if you, this is stupid. They shouldn't do this. But what would be interesting to me is if you could like inject your own photographic styles in there that you've actually designed. So like there's certain things that I could do something more like the most successful versions of this I've seen so far are Fuji. And actually I was shooting with Leica quite a bit on this trip. Jason, my friend that was traveling with us, brought a Leica Q and shot a bunch on that. And it has a look to it. It's a little more, it has more character than say a Canon or Sony have by default. And same with Fuji, has a very strong look to it. Simbrash, that's been on this show a lot of times, has talked about how he shoots straight to JPEG for his work in the New York Times. And when you can add a character that really has an interesting personality and then bake it in, like that can be really worth it. And you don't end up editing the photos often. So like I might do that if I could, where I would probably just like, I'd make the skies like a little bit more cyan and a little bit darker. And then I'd make, I don't know, I'd push the oranges to be tiny bit more magenta and like, I don't, just like make these little tiny tweaks
Yeah.
that still mostly look normal, but they'd have a bit of what I think of as a film look. And then I'd shoot that all the time. Apple
Yeah.
just didn't do anything that is the look that I would do all the time. So,
When I think that's what, when they first announced it, it kind of seemed, and everyone was going crazy on Twitter about what all the new features were. I saw some people talk about how like, oh, you can like create your own LUTs with this, and there was almost like confusion, and it wasn't. I even wasn't that clear listening to Apple talk about it. So when the finally came out to play with on the iOS update, and I saw its kind of limitations with that, I was like, okay, so it's not that. It's not like what you just described, which I agree would be cool because there are a lot of people who have developed their own look, and like I could see someone like Peter McKinnon or something just like having his Peter McKinnon, iPhone what LUT or whatever, and just shoot straight to that and have a baked in awesome image or something.
Well, and I know from a more mainstream perspective, like on the talk show last week, Gruber was talking about that. There's, he was seeing that Austin Evans in his review talked about that he had a bit of a look that he was going to keep using with his photographic styles that he dialed in, and they talked about it's like, oh, so everybody could have their own look that they pass around, and get other and maybe other people could download it, or you could just tell people to set your settings like this. But there's not that many variables. Like you just can't change it that much anyway. So I don't know. I don't see that being a big part of the future of photography. Okay. Anyway, let's get to the pros because the 13 Pro and the Pro Max are like, they're the ones this year. I mean, anybody listening to this show, I feel like that's probably what you want. Like the difference is pretty noticeable. There are some really fantastic features that are super worth it this year. Which, like I said, okay, I'm just going to say it again that if you like that small screen size, you can now be happy with the mini. But there are so many features in the Pros that it is just so clearly the phone that I'm going to be using this year. The one I can go over quickly is like the variable refresh rate, 120 hertz. I showed it to my wife, Anya, and I'm like, do you see this? Like, do you see a difference in these two screens? And she's like, no, I don't see it. And I've heard from other people that they don't see it. So it's not, if you don't know what it looks like, if you don't know what to look for, you may not find it. Did it jump out at you? Like, how did you feel about it?
It's fine because I never really cared for 120 hertz screens. Like, I think the some Samsung device earlier this year, the OnePlus 9 Pro, was the first time having a device full time, and I was like, it's nice. I get why people like it. I never really minded, and I think Apple's always had pretty much the best 60 hertz screens out there. So I did notice it. I definitely felt it as soon as I turned on the device. I'm like, whoa, there's the ProMotion screen.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. For me, I'm like in the middle. It's nice. If they removed it, I wouldn't cry. But it's perfectly fine that it's here. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still using my 12 as my like full-time phone right now. I haven't transitioned over, so I'm still like looking back and forth at both of them, and it's funny because I don't notice when I go back. So I go back to the 12, and I don't notice like, oh, this looks choppy. It still works fine. But I notice when I pick up the 13 and I scroll and I flip through a whole bunch of photos, I'm like, oh, that is so smooth. Like it is 100% visible to me. It's very perceptible. And a thing that's really interesting about it too is that this seems to be a lot of the reason for the improved battery life. And now I'm just going off of what other people said, but it seems like because there is this ability to, so yeah, I mean, you're at 120 when you scroll quickly, but then once you settle on a static page, it goes down from 120 refreshes per second all the way down to 10. So now, I mean, that's very helpful for a screen to not need to be refreshing that often. And then the massive improvements are if you're streaming video or playing back video. A lot of video is at 24, 25, or 30 frames per second, which is like basically nothing. It's half of the usual 60. So because of that variability, that's a lot of why we're seeing the improved battery rate, times, like that it just lasts longer because it doesn't have to do as much. And the screen is so much of the draw on the battery in the first place. So there's kind of these hidden benefits of it as well, even at times that the visual look is the same, it's doing something that helps in your daily performance of the phone as well. So
That's funny because I guess I didn't really think about that because when last week I was filming so much test footage, even with like the ProRes HQ stuff that I thought was going to destroy the battery. And in the couple hours that I was filming with it, it like barely touched the battery. And I always film at 24. And so I wonder if that is a reason because I feel like on my 12 Pro Max, which obviously was a 60 hertz screen, when I filmed a lot, it ate through that battery really quickly. So that's really interesting. Never really thought about
yeah,
it like that.
there's all these efficiencies with it. It's also there's some stuff that, like, so Max Tech YouTube channel has been talking about they've been doing some of the tests that I'd like to do more scientifically because I only saw it in the real world. But things like screen dimming, which has been a big issue, especially if you're in a hot place, that like your screen, if you're doing anything intensive, is going to get dim after some amount of time. And in my use, just like, I was outside in Hawaii, so it was like hot, and the screen is going to dim eventually, but I was using the 12 right next to the 13, and the 12 would typically dim sooner than the 13. But in Max Tech's tests, they were able to see that, like with gameplay, if you operate in low power mode, you're able to get way more basically have it never dim. The performance, the frame rate, and all of the performance metrics stay the same, but your screen stays bright the whole time. So low power mode might be the way to go if you're doing photography in general. Like I actually don't know what you'd be giving up necessarily. It seems like
That's cool.
if you keep the screen bright longer, like that's super valuable. It's actually still one of the, it's something I guess I've never talked about in a review and is worth mentioning though, but like dimming screens is a huge problem when you're shooting with an iPhone. Like there are times that it's like all of a sudden in the middle of a shoot, because sometimes we're doing iPhone only shoots. It's like, oh, I can't see the screen at all anymore. Even if I cover it up, it's so dark that, it's basically you're unable to see it until it cools down a little bit. So
yeah, just throw an ice pack on it.
It's true. Sometimes though. I'm very tempted to, yeah. But going along further, that like here's why the Pro is the choice this year. We've also got the new ultra wide, the bigger sensor and lens inside of either the 13 Pro or 13 Pro Max, not available in the others. I actually can't see what the upgrade, like Apple says there is an update to the ultra wide in the 13. I don't know what it is. Like the specs are the same. The results look the same. There is a visible difference. It does look better. I was hoping for it to like jump out at me in a way that it didn't, especially considering how much better the numbers are. Like the aperture is much faster. The sensor has like a larger pixels per capture. And then in the results, I was like, yeah, it's better. I can shoot in lower light, but it's not keeping up with the wide. That's what I thought based on what they had said. I'm like, oh, it'll be like shooting on the regular wide lens of maybe an iPhone 11, right? And it's just not quite. What was your experience with it?
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's better. Like in super low light on the ultra wide on my 12 Pro Max, it was anything I shot with it was just unusable for anything more than like I technically captured that image or video.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like, okay, I can use this. Now I'd say it's like decent for like the home video, like I'm recording something on my phone, but anything that would borderline professional work, I wouldn't use it in low light, especially for video. Like you talked about in your video, how in still photography, there's so many things you can do to clean up an image in low light, but in video, there's only so much post-processing you can really do before it's just straight mud.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I noticed the improvements. It's definitely better, but like you exactly said, it didn't jump out at me like, wow, that's amazing. It's still like, oh, it's low light. I'm going to stick to the wide angle.
I also
recorded the telephoto is
some,
just the bad.
Yeah, I recorded some nighttime like vlogging tests on that ultra wide that didn't make it into the final cut, so nobody saw them. But what I saw in that is basically that most of the image looked basically the same. This was comparing the 12 Pro and the 13 Pro on the ultra wide. Pretty similar looking image. except that the blacks were able to, like the darkest parts of a dark image were able to be lifted noticeably without raising any noise. So, and then again, a little bit of that, like the HDR was able to operate a little bit more so it could keep highlights a little less clipped. So basically, yeah, it was like extending that dynamic range a bit, but keeping a kind of similar noise profile. And that's in video
Yeah.
again, when like the least processing's happening. Once we do some more ProRes tests on it, we'll probably have a better sense of what's really, really happening in there. So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it's like, I'm only disappointed because of my expectations. It is still better, which is
And you
good
get
and what
macro
I asked
mode.
for. Oh, macro, yeah, of course. Okay, so macro is one of the best things about this. It really is. It's a, and I was literally forgetting this. This is so much of the reason that, like, if you're into photography, this is why you go for the Pro this year. Like, you will be so sad watching everybody else's macro photos showing up and that you can't take them. It was the thing that all of a sudden, like, we were just looking at every object around us, and we're lucky to be in a place where there's a ton of flowers on all the trees. So we got all these flower macros. It's awesome. It's like a good macro.
So
It's
good.
not perfect, but it's yeah, it's very good. Had you shot macro much before this?
Not a super lot. And I have like so I use all IRIX cine lenses on my main cameras. And so I have a 150 macro. And anyone who does normal macro knows that everything is very compressed except for the subject. And what's interesting about this is, since it's an ultra wide lens, it gives very similar vibe to the Laowa 24 millimeter probe lens, which is really fun to shoot. And we've all seen it in commercials and used for very like creative things, because it's a macro, but it's an ultra wide, so you still have perspective of the entire atmosphere of the area as well. And so I agree that I think it's going to open up a whole new world, and the quality is just so good. I mean, in my video, I'd like just put my finger up to the lens and got like 5 comments of people trying to steal my identity through my fingerprint.
Yeah, right.
I knew that was coming. But it's incredibly sharp. I understand people's weariness. I'm curious on your thoughts on like how there's no macro mode. So if you're just in your regular wide lens, then and you get really close to something, it kind of transitions. I know Marquez pointed it out that the jump is kind of weird, but I think that can be like in a simple software update, whether they separate the modes or just make that transition smoother or more apparent that you're switching lenses. Hasn't really bothered me too much.
Yeah,
But I think the
saw
macro
that. I
stuff's
saw it be
awesome.
a sort of a common take. Like a few people mentioned it. Yeah, especially starting with Marquez, and it didn't bother me at all. Like I didn't even think about it until he pointed it out, and then still using it afterwards. I didn't find myself. There were a few times where I found myself not being able to get it to switch over. The best example was actually I was trying to take macro shots of the phone, and and it's reflective, so it would think that I was trying to focus far away, because in a reflection, the actual focus distance is the distance of what's being reflected, right? So
Yeah.
if you're close up to a mirror, the point of focus is not
That's fun.
the 1 inch away from the mirror that you are. You could be touching the mirror, but the point of focus is still as far away as the objects are in that reflection. So when I get my macro close up to a piece of glass, like the back of an iPhone, it's trying to focus on the sky reflected in the background or the trees or whatever, and it doesn't know that I'm actually looking at something close up. It just doesn't understand that. It thinks I'm looking at something the distance of the reflection. So that was the time. That was the one time I was like, oh, I can't override it. This is driving me crazy. So, I do think that an override is, it should be somewhere, but for a normal user, I think the way that they did it probably is the right call and is what people want most of the time.
Well, and it'll
And
probably end up being something like what we talked about earlier, where it's a good setup for the stock camera app, and then as long as apps like Halide have access
right.
to do it,
Yeah.
they can make their own separate macro mode. So if you're in that one-off situation, then you can override it.
Yeah. And also say in terms of video, I don't know if I really included any macro video samples, because it's really hard to hold still enough. And this is about macro. It's not about the phone, but like the movement is very exaggerated. So it's really hard to shoot macro video without tripods. And if you're shooting plants, which is what I was doing, like it was such cool
Also
shots. Like I
moving.
wanted to include them. Yeah. I had ants crawling around that were like they're like half the size of the ants we have here. Like all the ants in Hawaii are like tiny, tiny,
Hmm.
and they would look giant, of course, because it's macro. But I wanted to record videos of it, but like the leaf and the flower is moving and I'm moving, and you need everything to be locked down to do video with macro. So um,
Yeah, it's true.
another big thing, finally, the thing that you'd done your video on is ProRes, which the story is not complete yet. So your response to it is kind of the initial dropping of it in the Filmic app, that they seemed to jump the gun a little bit in a way. Like they were able to access it through the iOS update, and Apple's official support of it is coming soon. So this won't be the definitive conversation about it, because obviously seeing how Apple interprets it is going to have like a bigger overall effect on the industry. But we saw Filmic show us what it can be. What did you think of shooting ProRes?
Yeah, so I will say that, and obviously the source is Filmic, so take that with a grain of salt, but they said that the actual image quality should pretty much be what the final result for whatever Apple implements into their stock camera app. Maybe they'll have different settings or something. But one, I was extremely stoked to see that they had the various flavors of ProRes. I know a lot of people were debating prior that there would be either a new type of ProRes or that it would just be a version of ProRes LT. But the fact that we got Proxy LT and the regular 422 and then HQ is just awesome. Again, my style is go big or go home, so I shot everything on HQ. And when I got the clips back on the computer and saw that they were all upwards of like 600 megabits per second compared to the normal video app in the HEVC regular mode is like anywhere from like 20 to maybe 80 if you're shooting 60 FPS. And so that was a huge jump. And there was one specific shot of my nomadic bag where I zoomed in, it's like 250% or something, and just really saw the difference in it. And I was just blown away. And so I'm a huge fan of ProRes, but there's a big but in there. The workflow is a nightmare just because of the file sizes. I shot the whole A-roll sequence on the phone using ProRes HQ, and for about 20-minute file, it was almost 90 gigs, and I shot over 300 gigs just doing that video. And so obviously I was like, oh, this is why I bought the 1 terabyte phone. But that was only after 4 days in comparison to having, years worth of photos and videos on there. And then really the biggest hiccup is just transferring it. The airdrop is pretty much useless, or it's a headache. And then over Lightning, it kind of leads into the biggest disappointment of the phone this year, of them not going USB Type-C. Still confuses me very much. But not to get ahead of myself, the image of ProRes is awesome, and I'm very excited for it. What did you think about? I don't know if you saw the actual samples. I ended up uploading like 10 of the files to like Frame.io so people could download like the full res, so they didn't get YouTube compression. But have you had a chance to play? Or earlier you said you haven't had a chance to play with ProRes yet?
Yeah, I didn't shoot it. Well, so after I watched your samples of ProRes, I went and watched any other videos out there, because a few other people released example videos as well. So I saw as many as I could. And again, I don't want to put in like final conclusions yet until I've shot it myself. I just haven't installed it. Like I just haven't done it. I will, but so I don't even know where to start. There's so many things to say about it. Here, maybe I'll start by extending an argument I was having on Twitter about LT versus HQ. And I'll start that by explaining to anybody that doesn't know why ProRes is exciting. Is like, it's the most common video codec standard in the professional world. Like it's what the most people are using for the most things. And it's really edit friendly. So Macs especially can like just blast through it. And, when I remember when the phone switched to HEVC compression, they started to really slow down in editing. Like sometimes editing your iPhone 12 footage would like crush a powerful MacBook Pro. That's not good. So shooting in ProRes, even though the files are bigger, they're going to edit faster. And then they're also just less compressed. So looking at other people's samples, the places I saw the best example was actually in movement compression. So somebody else had something where they're walking by a chain link fence. So obviously a chain link fence is like updating very quickly. It's almost like static, right? Think of like the HBO logo or waves in the water. Anything that is very noisy is going to need to be very compressed in a highly compressed format, and you'll see so much of that mushiness, that like softness is really exaggerated. Whereas in a still image of, me right now, like whatever, if it's locked off, you're not going to see much changing. The compression won't be that strong. But once things started moving, it's like, wow, the difference is enormous. The LT versus HQ thing I was talking about, I think the way to go if you're going to shoot ProRes on an iPhone is 100% shooting LT. And I have a feeling it actually might come down to being proxy. I think that a lot of the reason that most people would choose ProRes HQ would be for color grading, so that you have the most flexibility in post to adjust your image as far as you want. But typically on those other cameras, when you're shooting in HQ, you're shooting in a log format where you've extended the dynamic range by flattening the image and desaturating it. So you have all this room in like a 10 or 12-bit image in HQ, 444, all this stuff lets you push and pull it really far. But that's because it's already log. So in the context of an iPhone footage currently, what Filmix current implementation is that it's still full contrast. So you're not able to access that flexibility of a log image anyway. So to me, it's like you shoot LT or possibly even proxy, you're going to get 95, 99% of that quality improvement, switching away from the super compressed H.265 compression of the default camera settings. And the files will be half the size of what you were shooting, or in the case of proxy, maybe even a little less than half. I'm not totally sure. And hopefully the proxy codec, I think, still can shoot 4K as well. So you're going to get rid of all that motion compression, and you're going to get rid of just like kind of that detailed 100% compression will go away. You'll just like lose that flexibility in post.
Yeah. And I've started to, after the initial, like, I just want to check out what, the best technically HQ thing can produce. And I got all those comments of like, oh, well, how does LT or proxy come out in terms of storage? And I understand shooting ProRes on Blackmagic cameras that, you can, like you said, get 90% of the same image quality. And what the second thing that stood out to me, just like the detail compared to the more compressed codec, is the noise. And going back to us talking about the ultra wide camera, I'll be curious once you actually test it out for yourself. What I was noticing is there's the same amount of noise, but since ProRes, the post-processing it does, the debayering or whatever the super nerdy stuff is, processes so much better than other codecs. There is still a good amount of noise, but it is much better looking. It's closer to like the grain that we all like. It's still not great because you've reached the hardware limitation of a small sensor and small optics, but it definitely looks better on the ultra wide in low light situations, just because the noise profile itself looks better than the very muddy, kind of mushy, kind of weird blended colors and noise that the compressed codecs have. So, and even in Patrick Tomaso's video, he shot all low light samples that I posted earlier today. And the biggest thing I saw was the difference in the chroma noise. The noise on the ProRes actually looks like the shadows look like black rather than that like kind of tinted blue that can look very ugly. So yeah, so even in addition to detail, it's just a lot better noise as well.
Well, actually, and speaking of chroma, first thing, when you say noise, that reminds me of last year when you shoot in RAW in stills. That was the same difference that you would see. So typically Apple's processing would aim for this like smoothness that would actually look less detailed and less sharp. But if you shot RAW and let some of that noise continue to exist, you'd perceive the image as being sharper, even though it was a bit noisier. I think it looked better. So I think maybe we're seeing something similar. But yeah, when it comes to like chroma sampling, what's going to be interesting about this, and actually a good reason to shoot HQ or even 422 that I think will actually get used by professional social media creators is there's a lot of examples where people are shooting on their phones and doing post-processing like green screen, or like a common dance trend right now is people wear a single cut, like a green jumpsuit, and then they change the color of it throughout. Anything like that is going to perform way better, especially the green screen. That's like the big one. That's one that we've done a bunch, where we were doing jobs last year where I was shooting on our big camera. I was shooting on like the the Canon C70 or C200 to get 12-bit so we could do green screen as good as we could. But then it's like I got to make sure that the background is fully in focus. I've got to make it look like a phone because it was going to be for social anyway. But now it's like, well, just shoot it on the phone, shoot it in ProRes HQ, and you're going to be able to pull a perfect key off of it. So I actually think this will get used. Like, this is not just a novelty thing to make it like, oh, they're more professional. Like, this will be used by professional content creators quite a bit, including me. So
100%.
I do think ProRes is going to be a thing.
And now that I know LumaFusion's now updated to edit in ProRes, so anyone who's used to editing on, whether on their phone, I think is pretty rare, but at least on an iPad or something. So as long as they can figure out the transferring of footage workflow, which, like you said, the proxy or LT should be a lot smaller file sizes, so hopefully faster and easier to transfer, then it'll be great. And I 100% agree that I don't think this was a gimmicky feature at all. To me, cinematic mode was, it's not a gimmick mode. I think it actually works really well, but I think this is much more niche, but useful in the pro market. So it makes sense on the pro phones.
You know what really sold me on cinematic mode being something that'll really get used actually was Jesse Driftwood, been on the show a few times and just one of the most epic creators out there, has traditionally shot a lot of his cinematic Instagram stories on bigger cameras, which is super cool. It's like something I experimented with a few times, and it give you this really unique look for a story that, what's supposed to be a disposable 15-second clip looks like a movie, and there's a shallow depth of field. But he shot some stories on his iPhone 13 the other day, and they looked like a real camera. In stories, you can't tell like that. All of the depth of field looks real, especially if you turn it down a little, because you'll find a little tip. I mean, I said this in the video too, but if anybody is using the default, I think it defaults to like f2.8. That's way too blurry for a close-up, like a talking head or anything like that. You should be turning it down to like f8 or f9. And it still looks quite blurry like that and super realistic. And I swear, in Instagram stories, nobody will notice. And people undervalue stories, reels, TikTok. That's like half of what filmmaking is these days, and people are going to use it, and it's going to look way better than those fake blurs that were coming out of Samsung phones or out of like Instagram filters or any of that. It's a totally different look from that. And so, yeah, basically both of these things are reasons that now you don't need to pull out a big camera to shoot professional social media content, because the phone can now handle it itself.
It's true. I mean, when I went to Seattle last week, I literally brought my 50-pound bag with, cinema cameras, cine lenses and stuff. And I pulled it out twice, I think. And it was actually only to shoot B-roll of the iPhone 13. So anytime we went on like a hike or again to the Space Needle or something, I was like, I'm just going to bring the phone.
Yeah. Well, turns out there's a lot to talk about for an intimate incremental upgrade. So this has been fun, and thanks for coming on, Michael. Anybody that isn't following Michael Tobin on YouTube, you should right now. What's your actual YouTube address to make it super easy if people don't want to click the link in the description, which they should?
It's either @InitialFocus or /InitialFocus for YouTube. So yeah,
super
pretty
easy.
much everywhere.
Cool. Thanks again, man.